All right. What's up, everybody? We are getting situated, and then we will be at it for our first edition of Bearded Geek Live. All right. All right. Let's see here. So yeah, we're gonna go through a couple of different things this evening. Uh, Talking about legacy sequels and talking about how the Fantastic Four did and all of that. We start off. I want to talk about the fact that we are in a weird time because man, when we I did not have it on my bingo card that man, in the same week you would have both Ozzy Osbourne and Hulk Hogan pass away. Of wild. You know what I mean? There's been a lot of talk as far as Ozzy goes, and did he give his life to Christ and all this other stuff. I'm not the biggest Ozzy Osbourne fan, but there's no doubt the the impact that the dude had on music. And I have to say, when I was a teenager and I was first getting into metal and all of that, was it was definitely Black Sabbath was definitely something a band that like a lot of young metalheads I listened to, and I appreciated, and all of that. But yeah, I can't say as though I'm like a diehard Ozzy fan and all of that. But I mean, he was relatively young too, you know what I mean? Like but I know he had been dealing with a lot of medical issues and all of that sort of stuff. Hulk Hogan, that's a guy, right? Like that's a and there's you can see him in my background. um I have a replica title belt. I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. I have been for a long time, and I grew up on those 80s era tapes and all of that. No, I am not of the vintage that I can like remember them. But do I do remember seeing those characters, that era, pretty early on in my time as a wrestling fan. And so I've always been aware of who Hulk Hogan was. Actually, I knew who Hulk Hogan was from wrestling and noticed him when I fell in love with the Rocky series, in his time as Thunderlips. Um, it's he gave a lot of memories to a lot of people, and for there's a not zero amount of people who are mourning somebody that that they really admired or looked up to, or was that was a part of something that formed a lot of memories from them and all of that sort of stuff. And you have that whole part of his legacy that is like this figure, this larger than life figure. And for me, I was never that big of a Hulk Hogan fan either, not to sound like a hipster with both of these people that passed away, but like I was always more of like a Randy Savage fan, or I was more of like a Shawn Michaels fan, and I really got into characters that came after Hogan. in that era of wrestling. Um, I was more of like a Andre the Giant fan than like a Hulk Hogan fan. And then everything happened after he came out of the limelight, and his racist tirade and his problematic behavior, and recently his um very political leanings and all of this sort of stuff. So I leave it at, man, yeah, he definitely had a problematic legacy, and he wasn't necessarily the best human being in the world, to say the very least. But I don't want to discredit anybody has um that has been impacted by his time in the limelight. Not to mention, there are very real people who are mourning the passing of a husband and a father and a friend and all of those kinds of things. And just because he was a figure doesn't mean that we have the right to discredit what other people are feeling. And I guess I try to look at it with a measure of grace. Will I make room for or try to pacify wildly racist comments? No. No, I won't. Um, do I look at it from the standpoint of all of us have done things that we are seriously not proud of? Yeah. I mean, that's a categorically true statement. Um, I think I think everybody who has an opinion one way or the other of the man is entitled to their opinion. I'm not gonna try to limit somebody else's voice in the matter. I just yeah, I'm not gonna play just because he passed away like he wasn't an incredibly problematic human being. But also at the same token, try to remember that we need to have a certain measure of grace on for other human beings. This stream brought to you by 7 Up Tropical. Um so yeah, that's that. Um it's always it is weird, right? Because Hogan's a character that's been around for the entirety of my life, obviously, and so now to live in a world that's post Hulk Hogan being alive is strange. It's kind of how I felt about Betty White when Betty White passed away. Like, I liked the Golden Girls, but I wasn't like a supreme fan of Betty White. But it was weirder to think about the fact that we live in a world where Betty White is no longer alive. That sort of thing. So, but yeah, they weird deaths tend to happen in threes, and those two and Chef Amberell was my third one. That one got me. That one was probably the most impactful for me, out of the three. Being a chef and knowing what happened with her, um it was, oh, it's unfortunate because while she may be one of the most well-known cases, she is far from the first chef to take her life. Um and so and that just is a whole tirade about the kitchen and all of that. I'm having technical difficulties. Hang on. Okay. All right. So yeah, that so for our first live, I wanted a chance to do a couple of things that are very that are very timely, but also things that I didn't want to make a full blown video about because I'm not I'm not a huge fan of getting um I'm not a huge fan of talking about anything on this channel that I'm not overly a fan of. And a big part of the reason for that is that I I try very hard with Thoughts from a Bearded Geek to cultivate positivity and all of that sort of stuff. But I can't I watched a movie over the last week or two that has me in my feels about the incredible amount of legacy sequels that are happening in the world of Hollywood. So as you know, I'm a huge horror fan, and I recently saw the legacy sequel for I Know What You Did Last Summer, and um, this is not the first horror movie that has really gotten a lot of buzz because of a legacy sequel and all of that sort of stuff. Just earlier this year we had a legacy sequel for Final Destination Bloodlines, and then of course they're still churning out Scream movies. And then really the biggest one in semi recent memory that kind of kicked off a new era of horror legacy sequels was Halloween 2018. And I would argue that out of all of the legacy sequels that have taken place, that's probably the one that has been the best out of all of them. This last one with I Know What You Did Last Summer, this is my problem is it's not telling a different compelling story. It's just set in this universe for the sake of making more money. And all but was made for the idea of like let's do another sequel set in this world to maximize money and profit that we can make off of this IP, and we don't want to be left behind by the by our competitors, by the other ones in this genre and all of that sort of stuff. And it's part of my problem with this is why this channel, even though I talk a lot about movies, could never be just a movie channel. Like there's so much more. Like I talk about the philosophy of, and I love talking deeply about different IPs and all of that sort of stuff. And that's the reason why I tend over to the comic side of things rather than the movie side of things, because generally the movie side of things, it requires a level of dedication that I just cannot bring myself to have when it comes to a willingness to go see whatever comes into theaters, because a lot of what's coming into theaters nowadays is just reductionist. It's just the same old thing over and over again, where we're digging up these movies from 20, 30 years ago and trying to give sequels to movies that were never intended to have a sequel in the first place. Like you look at the a movie from the 90s, My Best Friend's Wedding. Now, unless you are of a particular vintage, you probably don't really even know what that movie is. But it's a movie from the 90s, and it has lived in the world of pop culture now for 30 plus years. And in an effort to cash in on nostalgia and all of that, it's getting a sequel. And then you have the remake of The Naked Gun that's coming out with Liam Neeson. And you have another movie coming out, another Scream movie coming out next year. And then you have, again, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Jurassic Park, another Jurassic Park movie just came out. And I mean, can we do something that is a little more inventive than just watching the same, like dragging up these movies over and over and over again? And spoilers for, like, I understand that horror is kind of a unique genre, subgenre, and I understand that there's probably a larger part of the fan base that is not into horror than is into horror. And so I won't belabor the point too long talking about horror stuff, but if you do happen to want to watch this movie and all of that, then I will say spoilers. But there were a lot of pieces to I Know What You Did Last Summer that were awesome in theory. I'm not opposed to bringing back a legacy sequel or bringing back a legacy character and saying this legacy character has been through so much trauma and couldn't work their way through that trauma. And so they turned around and did the thing that caused them trauma to other people. As a mental health professional, as a counselor, as somebody who finds that stuff fascinating, I think that's a brilliant idea. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Freddie Prinze Jr. famously has always turned down roles that he's asked to reprise, like for legacy sequels for older movies. And he's talked about how he's been offered all of these different roles to go back and sequelize movies that he's made that were more or less standalone. And he talked about how he was ready to say no to returning for I Know What You Did Last Summer until the person, like, gave him the elevator pitch on where they would be picking up his character Ray, like the 30-ish years on from when the movie takes place in the first place. And he talks about how, like, it was that idea that got him. And I feel bad for him because I guarantee at a premise level the idea was probably really cool in presentation. The way it was presented, though, was terrible. Like, it was just a series of things happening to get to the end conclusion, and a lot of them didn't really make a lot of sense. And I don't understand why Sarah Michelle Gellar's character got a whole dream sequence to herself, and, like, she was brought back in the way that she was. And I do know why. It's because Sarah Michelle Gellar, because of Buffy and all of that. And I understand she's famous because of Buffy. And I will at some point in my life go back and watch Buffy. I've watched bits and pieces of Buffy, but I won't. I've never watched the full thing. And at some point, I will go back and watch Buffy. But she's been in, like, two horror movies, and they weren't particularly Oscar worthy performances in either one. She was in I Know What You Did Last Summer, and she played, like, the prom queen, like the popular girl sort of thing. And she was in Scream 2, and she played a sorority sister. And she played the namesake of Drew Barrymore's character in the first one, in the first Scream movie. Um, for those of you that have never heard or never watched a Scream movie, um, they're very self-referential. But it's not like she was particularly impactful in those movies, and so that just I don't know. And nobody was likable. Like I don't I'm all for make a movie that resonates with a younger generation. I don't have a problem with that. I don't need it to be my like I had mine. I as a product of the 90s, I already had my I Know What You Did Last Summer movies. I already had my post Scream slasher craze. Okay, great. Make a movie that resonates more with the time and place of the modern era. No problem. That's not my issue. When you drag these IPs out for no good reason, and I just feel like there's got to be something to be noticed about the fact that, like, when everybody talks about, yeah, but what about Top Gun Maverick? Yeah, Top Gun Maverick was a very solid movie. But when that's pretty much the only legacy sequel that is any kind of good, I do think it's time to reevaluate your decision making process when what you with what you greenlight and what you don't. And that's why I just tell people, like, if you're looking for something different, if you're looking for something new, if you're looking for original storytelling, if you're looking for any of that stuff, then go on and um look for like film festivals, and the fact that they a lot of times will bring their best performing movies to like a live stream format. And so you can go out of your way to find those movies in live streaming format. You know what I mean? And then you're supporting creators of original content and all of that. Um but yeah, so that's those are my thoughts on legacy sequels. I think Hollywood needs to have an original thought. I don't think cinema is dying. I think that that's the wrong message to take from the downtick in box office. I think the economy sucks and original stories aren't being told. And that's part of why I appreciate the 90s era of movies, because you could take a risk. Not everything was a temple. Not everything was $1 billion. Not everything cost millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. That was part of the reason why so many people enjoyed that's part of the reason why so many people enjoy old horror movies, is because the practical effects are so much better than CGI 9 times out of 10. And most of the time that happened because you needed to go practical because that's all you had money for. There was no money in the horror genre. And so everybody was just bootstrapped trying to do what they could do and all of that. And some of the movies where it was like shoestring budgets and all of that sort of stuff are the movies that live on in infamy. They're the ones that live on for generations. They're the ones that are still getting rebooted and remade and sequelized still to this day, you know? And so I think my hope is that we can move beyond just cannibalizing the past. And I think that goes into an even bigger conversation about nostalgia and about a hyperfixation on the nostalgic point of view on like movies and storytelling and all of that sort of jazz. Because man, I think I think there's more to solid storytelling than just hyper reliance on nostalgia bait for people that are, and I think part of it is it's easy to view the world as better back then, whatever back then is, whenever back then is, that it's better, it was better then than it is now. And so we get nostalgic for something that then we're honestly usually just looking at it from rose tinted glasses. We're not actually looking at it for what it was. And I think that's part of the issue that we run into with like legacy sequels and stuff like that. And so, um, speaking of movies, shifting gears here to the Fantastic Four. So Fantastic Four hit theaters, and this is a franchise that has largely not gone very well, and I don't know. I've got a soft spot for some of them more than others, but um this apparently did really well, grossing was it 218 million globally, which was Marvel's first open above 100 million this year. Um which people are saying that this has um stopped the slump and shifted things around and all of that sort of stuff. And it's slightly above conservative estimates, but realistically, um, behind what still behind what would have been like the height of the MCU. And I think part of the issue is the bloom is off the rose a little bit, and that's part of what I was hoping, would be like the exact opposite with DC, and why it's good to see that Superman is still going strong in the box office, because this is kind of like a fresh start. And I think Marvel was hoping that this would be a fresh start, but when it's still heavily reliant on um all of this backloaded nonsense of everything post Endgame, that it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to get into an advantageous position if you are Marvel. And honestly, I'm not the type that, like, I'm glad it's done well. I'm glad all of those things, but I view comic book movies like I view pizza. Bad pizza is better than no pizza. Bad comic book movies are better than no comic book movies. I have no problem with comic book movies and more comic book movies coming out. I hope that Marvel does well. I hope DC does well, because the more they do well, the more content that nerds get, and that's awesome. Um Geek culture is alive and well, but there's something inside of me that's very happy to see that Superman has been doing as well as it has been. But I'm not trying to get tribal about it. I hope Marvel succeeds. I hope they come out of the slump, because that just means good movies. That just means good comic book movies, and that's really, at the end of the day, what you can hope for. Because I remember when there were no comic book movies. I remember when there were just really bad comic book movies. I remember the early 2000s era Fox comic book movies. I remember everything pre MCU. I remember all of it. I remember when Mortal Kombat was this huge phenomenon in the world of cinema, because it was a halfway decent video game adaptation. I remember all of it. And so these movies doing well means more content for the rest of us. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beautiful thing, is um if you can have more successes, then that means more people get to eat, more nerds get to eat, and that's really what it's all about. So yeah, that's that. So Super Jurassic 4, whatever fans were calling the three-peat of movies that were coming out between Superman, Jurassic Park, and Fantastic Four. All of them are out. I will at some point in my life, I am sure, watch the Jurassic Park movies. Past the first two, I think I've seen the first two. I've lost interest after that, so I'm sure that at some point I will be into those movies, or at least watch them. And then, Superman and Fantastic Four being what they are. So yeah, the next piece of um can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. So the main event of the the main event of today's episode. What, my cats are all on some nonsense tonight. Um, if she comes out from her little hobby hole, I will let one of my cats make an appearance. So one of the things that now that we have this new version of Superman, that I thought it would be good for us, that would be fun to do, is now rank the major versions of Superman from across TV and movies. Now, for those of you that are hardcore fans and all of that, this is not comprehensive. This is not going to be every single version of Superman known to man. This is going on the small and big screen, but um, we are also adding in the animated Superman as well as live action. So, without further ado, I think DC has always had their bread and butter with they've always had their bread and butter with the small screen. And I will say that some of the best versions of the Big Blue Boy Scout have happened on the small screen. And but I have to give it give everybody their just due in the lineup. And that means that even though in the small screen the um there are a lot of good there's a lot of good to to the different versions of Superman, at the bottom of the list has to go Tom Welling, has to go Smallville's Superman. I think Smallville's Superman is I think it's a cool concept. The young Superman isn't a bad character or anything, but I also think that it's a there's a lot of there's a lot of untapped potential when it comes to that version of Superman, just by virtue of where he sits in the timeline of Superman. I think a lot of the characters that rotated around him were more interesting than him himself. It also kind of hurts the deal that a big part of it is high school dramatics and love stories rather than like Superman. You really don't get the superhero stuff until the back half of the series. Um, but all in all, not bad. But in the pantheon of live action Superman, um, I think there's the reality that you have to put him last. Just above him, because of everything that he brought to the table, I got to go with George Reeves. And there are probably plenty of people who are like, who? He was the first live action. Um, and I think he brought a relatability because he was like an everyman sort of figure. He brought a very everyman vibe to Superman. He wasn't like chiseled in the same way that I think fans kind of expect Superman to be nowadays. He looked like in a lot of regards that brought something special out of that character, and I think he did a very good job of embodying the golden age Superman. I think when you look at the actual eras of Superman, he did a good job of capturing the essence of the golden age era Superman. And so even though he was very short lived, I put him next up on the list because for what little time we had him as a Superman, I think he did a lot to I think he gave a lot to this idea of what was possible when adapting Superman. Next, we have Brandon Routh, the Superman Returns Superman. So, for those of you that don't know, Superman Returns was set in the same continuity as Christopher Reeve's Superman, and he was supposed to be that Superman that returned back to Earth after having gone away, and all of that set in that same continuity. Didn't catch on, and the movie itself, the plot itself, was the problem. I think him as a Superman, he was very plucky, he was very innocent, he was very charming, and I think he did a very good job when he returned in the Arrowverse to play Kingdom Come Superman. That did he brought a lot of depth to the character where like he looked tortured, he looked worn, he looked like an aged superhero in a lot of regards. And so when it comes to the pantheon of Superman, again, like George Reeves, very much a story of untapped potential, but one that I think for what we got, there was a lot of good about his rendition of Superman, especially as Superman. Not as strong as Clark Kent, in my opinion, but stronger as actual Superman. From that point, we move on to Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill, I think he did what he could with the movie. I don't think Man of Steel is bad. I just think Man of Steel doesn't understand. I just think Zack Snyder had a hard time understanding who Superman really was and what that character means. And I think that's the biggest sin of Man of Steel is for a lot of people he isn't their version of Superman. And I think Henry Cavill did a good job of being like that unsure but hopeful version of Superman. Um and but was able to bring some character and some nuance to the character that I think served well, but ultimately I don't think I needed any more out of him as a Superman. I was very happy to hear that he wasn't going. When I heard that he wasn't going to be continuing on as Superman, I for one was very happy to hear that because I think that with that version of Superman needed to go, and we needed somebody that we needed somebody who had a better grasp on the actual character of Superman and the actual character of Clark Kent. Um, from that point, we start to get into kind of rarefied air, in my opinion, because these top three are in each of their respective ways some of the best. They bring out some of the best aspects of Superman. They just two, three, and two, I think, only bring part of the story, whereas one brings the full package. Number three, Tyler Hoechlin, Lois and Clark, um, and then the like Arrowverse Superman, that era of Superman. If you've never watched Lois and Clark, um go watch it. Like all in all, very good movie or very good series. He's very much a family man. He's very much an all-around family man. I think the story probably would have done a little bit better if you would have had a younger. I think it would have made sense with his age bracket if you would have made the kids just a little younger, but they're, oh well. I think he did probably the best job of family man Superman I just don't know as though he was the full package with Clark and Superman. I think he was a very good Clark with a secret, but when it came time to be Superman, he left a little bit on the table as far as like a quality Superman. Whereas number two, with Christopher Reeve, I wasn't a big fan of him as Clark, but I think for Superman, as Supes, I think he did an amazing job. He's the guy who taught people that that a man could fly. He's the reason why we get all of these other versions. Like, yes, he's not the first, but he is by far and away the most impactful out of all of them. Like, he is one of, if we're just going off of the significance of the character and the significance of like his impact on the lore and legacy, then yeah, I think it's a no-brainer that you and that he's that if that was the only criteria, he would be at the top of the list. But I think the trouble with Superman is you essentially have to play two characters both at the same time. You have to play Clark Kent and you have to play Superman, and you have to do well at both. And the problem is he didn't do well at both. He didn't really bring that that Clark Kent character to life in the same way that number one did. David Cornsweet, the newest Superman, is I think the guy that I think he is a Superman for a whole new generation. And I know that, there's probably some recency bias, and I know I've talked a lot about Superman and all of that, but you're talking about a guy that has that you're talking about a guy that really shook things up across the industry. That he really shook things up in such a big way because he came out and was the best. There's a reason why people were calling him the best Superman since Christopher Reeve. And there's a reason why Christopher Reeve sits at number two and David Cornsweet sits at number one. And I don't think that that's recency biased, but I plan on going back and rewatching all of the movies, all to catch up and watch like get reacclimated to each one of the different versions and see if my opinion changes, and I will report back once I do. I am going to round off our time this evening together with a quick look at some upcoming things that are coming to theaters. So one of the cool things, if you pay attention, that happens is older movies tend to return back to theater. So if you are part of a Phantom theater where they run the Phantom events, and even some independent theaters will get access to movies that come back to theaters, usually for some kind of anniversary. And we're talking like older movies. And my wife and I have been doing this for years now, and we've seen Star Trek movies, we've seen Scream, we've seen a lot of different movies. Wizard of Oz just last year, um, back in theaters and on the big screen. Well, I just found out that there are some of the movies that are coming back to theaters this year. So we have August in August, Sunset Boulevard, which is like a dark comedy about Hollywood back in the day, is coming back to theaters. Late August, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990 is coming back to theaters. So I encourage everybody to go see these, because the more people that go see these return to movies, these movies returning to theaters, the more it tells it tells theaters to keep doing this because these timeless classics that are coming back, to see them on the big screen, it's a cool experience. The Sound of Music for musical fans, in mid-September. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy is coming to theaters in September, and then Rocky 4 in November. Y'all, I saw Rocky Balboa #6 when it came out in 2006 in theaters, but that's the only one that I've seen in theaters. This is one of the OGs that I'm going to get a chance to see in theaters, and I am stoked. Yes, I understand. I get it. Um, Rocky, solves the ends the Cold War essentially. I understand the ridiculousness of the premise, but like also it's Rocky, and so like it will forever hold a nostalgic soft spot in my heart. So for now, I have to dip. This is going to be a quicker stream because I've got to go to a meeting. Geeks, it has been fun. Let me know if you enjoyed this live stream format. For those of you that haven't already heard, if you chime in over on Twitch and you let us know that you are that you are tuning in from over there, your name will be entered into a raffle for a discount code for the KFM broadcasting merch store. So you'll be able to pick up some swag over there. But for now, that's it. That's all. That's a wrap. Thank you all. Stay tuned for the thoughts from the thoughts from a Bit of Geek YouTube channel, because another video is dropping later on this week. But